Welcome to World Pulse 360 Global, bringing you the latest news, compelling stories, science discoveries, historical insights, geopolitical updates, and much more. Comment, share, and subscribe. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your bank has closed, your savings are inaccessible, your employer can no longer pay you, and thousands of other people are searching for the same few jobs. This was the reality faced by millions during the Great Depression, the longest and most devastating economic downturn of the modern industrial era. Although people often associate it only with the United States, the Great Depression became a worldwide catastrophe. It destroyed businesses, impoverished families, destabilized governments, and contributed to the political conditions that eventually produced the Second World War. During much of the 1920s, the United States appeared prosperous. Factories produced automobiles, radios, and household appliances in enormous numbers. Consumer credit allowed families to purchase goods through installment plans, while investors poured money into the stock market. However, the prosperity was uneven. Farmers were already struggling with debt and falling crop prices. Wealth became heavily concentrated, while many families depended upon borrowing to maintain their standard of living. Banks were lightly regulated, and investors frequently purchased shares with borrowed money, a practice known as buying on margin. This created a dangerous financial structure that could survive only while asset prices continued rising. In October 1929, confidence collapsed. On October 24th, Black Thursday, panicked investors began selling millions of shares. The crisis intensified on Black Monday and Black Tuesday, October 28th and 29, when the market suffered enormous losses. Fortunes disappeared, businesses lost access to financing, and public confidence collapsed. But the stock market crash did not by itself create the entire Great Depression. It exposed deeper weaknesses that had been building for years. As businesses failed and borrowers could no longer repay their loans, banks began collapsing. The United States did not yet have federal deposit insurance. When a bank failed, customers could lose their life savings. Fear produced bank runs. Depositors rushed to withdraw their money, forcing even some otherwise functioning banks to close. Between 1930 and 1933, thousands of American banks suspended operations. The money supply contracted, borrowing became difficult, and prices fell. Widespread deflation made debts harder to repay and encouraged consumers and companies to postpone spending. Businesses responded by cutting production, lowering wages, and dismissing workers. This reduced purchasing power even further, creating a destructive downward spiral. By 1933, approximately 1/4 of the American workforce was unemployed. Millions more were working fewer hours or earning sharply reduced wages. There was no modern nationwide unemployment insurance system. Families depended upon relatives, charities, churches, and overwhelmed local governments. Bread lines stretched through major cities. Families unable to pay rent were evicted, while homeless settlements appeared on unused land. These settlements became known as Hoovervilles, a bitter reference to President Herbert Hoover, whom many Americans blamed for the government's inadequate response. Economic misery was compounded by an environmental disaster across the Great Plains. Years of intensive farming had removed native grasses that protected the soil. Severe drought and powerful winds then carried enormous clouds of dust across farms and communities. Crops failed, livestock died, and thousands of families lost their land. Many displaced farmers traveled west toward California, hoping to find agricultural work. Instead, they frequently encountered poverty, exploitation, and hostility. The Dust Bowl did not cause the Great Depression, but it made the suffering dramatically worse for rural Americans. The crisis spread rapidly because the global financial system was interconnected through international lending, trade, and the gold standard. American banks withdrew loans from Europe. World trade contracted sharply as countries imposed tariffs and restrictions intended to protect domestic industries. The American Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930 became one of the most famous examples, prompting retaliation from trading partners. Germany was especially vulnerable because its economy depended heavily upon foreign loans. Mass unemployment and political anger weakened confidence in democratic government. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party exploited economic suffering, fear, and resentment to gain political support. The Depression did not make dictatorship inevitable, but it created conditions that assisted Hitler's rise. Britain suffered severe unemployment in industrial and mining communities. France experienced political instability. Japan expanded military influence as leaders sought resources and markets abroad. Commodity-producing regions in Latin America, Africa, the Caribbean, and colonial Asia were devastated when international demand and prices collapsed. In British-ruled India, declining agricultural prices and colonial taxation deepened rural hardship and strengthened demands for political independence. In 1932, Americans elected Franklin D. Roosevelt as president. He promised what he called a New Deal for the American people. When Roosevelt entered office in March 1933, the banking system was close to collapse. His administration temporarily closed banks, inspected their finances, and permitted stable institutions to reopen. Roosevelt also used radio broadcasts, later called fireside chats, to explain government policy and reassure the public. The New Deal introduced programs intended to provide relief, promote recovery, and reform the financial system. The Civilian Conservation Corps employed young men on environmental projects. The Works Progress Administration created jobs building roads, schools, bridges, parks, and public buildings. The Tennessee Valley Authority constructed dams, generated electricity, and supported economic development in one of the country's poorest regions. The Social Security Act established pensions for older Americans and unemployment protections. Banking reforms created federal deposit insurance, while new securities regulations increased oversight of financial markets. However, the New Deal did not benefit everyone equally. Racial discrimination prevented many Black Americans from receiving equal access to jobs, housing, and benefits. Indigenous communities, Mexican Americans, immigrants, and women also experienced unequal treatment. The New Deal reduced suffering, restored confidence, and created institutions that continue to influence American life. However, historians generally agree that it did not completely end the Great Depression. The economy improved after 1933, but unemployment remained high. A new recession struck in 1937 after the government reduced spending and monetary conditions tightened. Full employment arrived only when the Second World War created enormous demand for ships, aircraft, weapons, and military supplies. War production finally ended mass unemployment, but at the terrible cost of global destruction and millions of lives. The Great Depression permanently changed how citizens understood government, banking, and economic security. It produced federal deposit insurance, social security, financial market regulation, unemployment protections, and a much larger government role in managing economic crises. Its most important lesson is that an economic disaster is never only about numbers. Behind every failed bank, closed factory, and unemployment statistic is a human story. A family losing its home, a farmer abandoning the land, or a worker searching desperately for dignity and survival. The Great Depression began as an economic crisis, but it became a worldwide political and social turning point. Its consequences reshaped capitalism, expanded government responsibility, and helped set the stage for the most destructive war in human history. This is World Pulse 360 Global, bringing you world history, international affairs, and the stories that continue to shape our lives. Subscribe so the next story finds you. Thank you for watching World Pulse 360.